Welcome everyone to this online conference from the European Women's Lobby. HerNetHerRights is a 6-month project led by the European Women's Lobby, which aims to analyze the current state of online violence against women and girls in Europe and to bring together diverse actors across Europe to come up with innovative solutions and policy recommendations to fight this pervasive violation of women's human rights and create a safer, more inclusive web for all women and girls. We've been working on the project for 5 months already, and we've collected a lot of data, analysis, contacts, and recommendations. With this online conference, we want to provide the opportunity to continue to learn together about male online violence. We have invited inspiring speakers who are experts, frontline workers, activists, decision makers, stakeholders involved on the topic. I will first start by thanking Google and the European Commission, who are EWL funders and help us work on cyber violence. I thank in advance all of the speakers and all of you who are listening to this online conference today. And I warmly thank our consultants, Marianne Nyosi and Adrienne Choucourt, thanks to whom the project is developing, and our colleagues at EWL Secretariat. Finally, all this work on online violence against women and girls is happening because EWL is a membership-based organization. It is thanks to the work every day of our members on the ground, helping women and girls, that we can learn from this phenomenon and we can raise awareness of the general public. Indeed, it is time that online violence against women and girls is addressed seriously. Our research shows that it's a gendered and prevalent phenomenon. Like other forms of male violence against women, it's part of the continuum of male violence. It impacts on all women and it perpetrates gender inequality. Its main goal is to silence women on the digital sphere to maintain inequality and power imbalance. With today's conference, we will be able to know more about the phenomenon, its scale, but also its root causes and ways to resist and eradicate it. During the conference, you can use hashtags to tweet, hashtag say no to online violence, and hashtag HerNetHerRights. After the conference, we will have a live tweet chat where we will be able to discuss and deepen our knowledge. We had invited 2 decision makers to this conference, but they could not join us. So we have posted already on our website the video message of Terry Reinke, a member of the European Parliament. She has been the rapporteur of the European Parliament resolution on women and gender equality in the digital world. So please go on our website after the conference to watch her. We also had invited Maria Gabriel, the EU Commissioner for the Digital Society, but she cannot be with us today. We're very happy that she's the commissioner on that topic because she's a strong feminist and she will ensure a good feminist perspective in her work. Let's now start with the first panel. You can see our speakers on the screen now. And I will give the floor to Alexandra Ash from Tactical Tech. Alexandra, you will introduce us to the topic of online violence against women and girls. And you will also give us tools to understand the types of violence and how pervasive and fluid such violence can be. The floor is yours. I cannot unmute her. I cannot unmute her. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute you, but it doesn't work. Adrienne, est-ce que tu peux l'unmute? Non. Okay. Can you try to unmute yourself, Alexandra? Yes, hello? It's okay now.
Okay. So many thanks for having us here. It's a very important conference, and I'm really happy to see other persons here that I really following the work I'm doing. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning, so please bear with me. I will try to be as clear as I can, okay? So the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit is the definition of violence against women that has been recognized as a violation of human rights by the United Nations General Assembly only in 1993. So this is important also to underline that this has been like a very late recognition. And they define violence against women as any act of gender-based violence that results or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women. And this can include threats of such acts, no? Coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. One important thing also is like the root cause of violence against women is the unequal power relations between men and women that are taking place in almost all aspects of life. So what does violence against women have to do with information and communication technologies, or in which way ICT is mirroring, enabling, or mediating violence against women? So first, I would like to define that information and communication technologies is all the tools and the platforms that we are using in our daily life for communication or information needs, and they can be analog or digital. So we can talk about mainstream media or television broadcast, communitarian radios, but we also talk about mobile phones and the internet. No? So we will be talking also about digital tools. And we should understand that right now there's a continuum between online and on ground, because I would not make the difference between virtual and real, because we are embodying our digital lives inside the online spaces, but also those relates to our physical approaches and what is happening on the ground. So there are some characteristics of ICT in how they mirror or enable gender-based violence, no, or enable new forms of violence against women. So as I say, ICT means to access and produce information. It means also to be able to have channels of communication that can be one-to-many, one-to-one, many-to-many, but it also enables the production of narratives and representation of the world, okay? So in that sense, we need to understand that the production of information generally is developing like little tropes that are little cultural units. And those tropes can become easily stereotypes, and the stereotypes can nourish prejudice and discrimination, which can become sexist and misogyny and bigotry that is normalized. So there's a first aspect of ICT in how it enables those gender division of the representation of the world, and that allows an array of representations, and that is like reinforcing the notions of difference between men and women, and what should be their role and their place in the society, and so on and so on. So there's a normalization of gender role stereotypes, and it's in many contexts it's very difficult to challenge those representations and to have like a confrontation about what is normal, what we uphold, and what we challenge. No? And so that's the first dimension that makes ICT like a specific characteristic in how it mediates and amplifies gender-based violence. Then there's also the fact that nowadays it has a different extension of what we share. So the audience can be local, but they can be also easily global. And there's a component of virality that can be achieved for image and contents that are shared online. This means that if, for instance, there's an attack against a woman that is rape or attack, and this is a film and shared online, it means that the extension of the harm towards this woman is going to get amplified, because every time somebody will share or view this content, this action of violence is going to re-victimify the person. So we are dealing with an extension of possible audiences of this kind of attacks and violences. And this relates also to another phenomenon of the internet that is called the fact that the internet doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. So it's very difficult to remove contents that are harmful from online, and this can be positive for some dimensions, no? To have the dimension of internet not forgetting, but it also can enter, no, in confrontation. For instance, in the European Union, we have the right to be forgotten, but it's not so easy to access this right for many contents and many situations of gender-based violence. So it's a double-edged sword. No? In that sense, also, there's another dimension of ICT that makes complex, that is the temporality. So harassment that happens on the off-ground can happen at some moments, but online it can be 24/7. It can happen all the time, all the clock round. So it makes it so easy to be desiring of stepping out, no, of the tech-related environment because of this situation. Then we have another criteria that we need to take in account is like freedom of expression is depending of the right to privacy and the right to anonymity. And this is very important because many of us or many opinions or survivors of violence or people that need to express a minoritarian point of view or in a context that is very conservative authoritarian, if they didn't have the right to anonymity, they could not express themselves, they could not express their voice. But again, it's a double-edged sword because a lot of attackers and harassers are using this situation of anonymity to hide themselves in the crowd. It makes many times very difficult to identify who is attacking you. And it's very difficult because many of those attacks are taking place through social media platforms which have their own governance. And we are still struggling to understand what are the terms of use and the privacy policies and the rules that they're applying to decide if something is harmful, if gender-based violence, which content should be removed or should not be. So we are also like dealing with an asymmetrical power relation with many of the platforms we are using to express ourselves or to put our contents online. So all to say is that the ICT and specifically internet has a set of specific characteristics that can mirror, amplify, and mediate new forms of gender-based violence against women. I hope it's clear. I'm going to go moving on. So another dimension that we wanted to talk a little bit is the data. So we see that there are very few longitudinal studies about the impact of gender-based violence online and the kind of attacks that are taking place. And this is very paradoxic because we are living the era of big data, and we know that every time there's more actors that are collecting those data, and they're collecting it very often for commercial and publicity, but also government and surveillance purpose. But we are lacking of data about what is the impact and the amount and the scale of gender-based violence taking place online. So for now, we have very few big studies that have been taking place. There's been like the Pew Research Center and the UN Women that have tried to understand better this phenomenon. And what we can see is that the phenomenon is massive. We are talking about millions of women engaging online and suffering some kind of online harassment. No? In the studies that I was just referring to, we can see that in rates, they are talking about 70 women of the samples they could collect that have declared to experience some kind of abuse online. And we could see that 27% of women are more prone to be abused online than men, and that the online harassers are more likely to be men on a rate of 61%. And then we can see also other symptoms, like, for instance, using a feminine username or an avatar that is feminine online is prone to receive more online threats than masculine usernames. The other thing that is interesting in the few studies and data that we have on the phenomenon is that age and gender are more closely associated with the experience of online harassment. And in that sense, the young adults between 18 and 13 are more likely than any other demographic group to experience online harassment. And among them, young women are the ones that are experience the more severe types of harassment, like being stalked online or receiving online sexual harassment, but also they are facing, like in a very high proportion, rates of physical threats, rape and death threats, no, and sustained harassment from their male peers and young people in general. So this is what we know, but in any case, it's very important that we keep like studying and researching the situation, the kind of different impacts, the kind of different violence that are taking place. In that sense, we can see that there's a lot of different notions and definitions. No, we are talking about cyberbullying, cyber harassment, gender related violence, and so on. I would like to talk about two definitions that I find interesting to understand a little bit more how it's taking place. We have, in one hand, Daniel Sifo, that defines cyber harassment as the intentional infliction of substantial emotional distress accomplished by online speech that is persistent enough to amount for a course of conduct rather than an isolated incident. So we can see that there's an intention and it needs to be sustained on time, so it has like a pattern, no? And she's talking about an emotional distress that is accomplished by online speech, no? Content. I would like to let this here and talk about another definition, another perspective of online harassment that has been proposed by Sarah Jeong, which is the author of research and a book that is called The Internet of Garbage, where she's proposing this understanding. So she says, harassment exists on two spectrums at once, one that is defined by behavior and one that is defined by content. When we look at harassment as content, as speech, we ultimately fixate on death threats as one end of the spectrum and annoying message at the other end. And there the debate ends up revolving around civil rights versus free speech. And it's very difficult to draw a line between mean comments or offensive comments and imminent danger, between jokes and threats. She proposed to focus and to try to analyze and understand harassment through the lens of behavior. She says that it's a more useful lens through which we can look to harassment to understand it. Because on one hand of the behavioral spectrum of online harassment, we see a vitriolic message thrown in the night, and on the other hand, we see the leaking of social security numbers, the publication of private photographies, the sending of SWAT teams to physical addresses and physical assaults in so-called real life. So here we can begin to understand that there are different ways of trying to analyze and focusing and define online harassment, and I would like to remember the difference between the speech and content and the behavior. No? And in that sense, I was supposed to go through the different kinds of violence against women that takes place online. I would just like to say, because I don't have any more time, that some attacks are just strategies that are based on social engineering and that don't require a big understanding or a big infrastructure. You know? So here we can talk about all the common strategies that are used by misogynists, that can be mansplaining, flaming, doxing private information with harmful purpose, stealing identities, making smearing campaigns, gaslighting, making you doubt of your reality, sending false alerts like swatting, and also all the attacks that are based in insulting, shaming, and mining the self-confidence, that the slut shaming, the fat shaming, inducing in negative behaviors, no? And also then there's another set of attacks that are based on the blackmailing and extortion. That would be the sextortion, the non-consensual pornography, the grooming, and the recruiting, no, by organized crime or other situations. And then we have other strategies that are more based in use of technologies, that is installing or getting you to install spyware to be tracked and monitored online and also offline. It can be also tracking your accounts and social media accounts or your website servers to silence you or take control of your identity and your presence online. It can be also like bombing contents in Google so they appear first in the research results. So there's like an interweaving between the strategic use of certain type of technologies to control, survey, harass, silence, and chill out, no? Generally women, but many of those attacks don't require like a high set of technical knowledge. They just are based on other system of control that are used in daily life. No? So yeah, just to say, and I'm finished here, that the impacts are very huge and they are very wide. So they are emotional, they are an impact on the health and the psychosocial well-being, they have an impact on your safety, on your dignity, on your reputation, on your civil rights, on your possibility to get education and professional opportunities, and also on your freedom of expression. I hope this was understand. Well, it's very difficult at 9:30 in the morning, but I hope you could understand me.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Alessandra. I know it's very difficult to summarize in such a small time, but I want to highlight three things you've said. First, you've proved that more women than men are abused online, which really show that it's a gendered phenomenon. You also highlighted the very thin line between the comments and the threats you receive online and how it might become reality. And I think that's part of what we identify as the continuum of violence against women, and that's also what the big problem with the virtual world is, and how it can have the impact that you mentioned, a very like big impact on women's emotional, mental, and health. And finally, you highlighted how the ICT world enables the production of narratives and representations of the world. And I think that's very important because people tend to forget, or they don't want to see the impact of what's going on virtually on our everyday life. And I think it's very important to encompass the virtual world in our real world. I will now give the floor to Elizabeth Kate McGuinness. She works for the European Institute for Gender Equality, and we are delighted to see that the Institute is working on cyber violence against women and girls. So we would like to hear from you, Elizabeth, about legal data in the EU and good practices for law enforcement and for the protection of victims. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me, Perrette? You can? Okay, great. Hello, everybody, and or potentially good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. And I'd like to thank everyone at the European Women's Lobby for inviting IGA to speak at this occasion. So the European Institute for Gender Equality was founded in 2010, and our mandate is to collect data and conduct research for better informed policy and decision making, both at the EU and member state level. So previously this year, we published our paper on cyber violence, and as a sort of loose follow-up to that, we are now conducting a qualitative research which will look at youth, digitalization and gender equality for the Austrian presidency of the EU, and among other things it will sort of look at digital space as gendered and explore the risks but also the opportunities for specifically girls in navigating that space. So the results of this can be expected in the latter half of 2018, in case you would like to look out for these. And you can also see our cyber paper currently online if you're still compelled to do so after listening to me talk about legal issues for the next 7 minutes or so early in the morning. So again, I would like to reiterate the points already made by Alexandra and Perrette previously, as understanding cyber violence as being on the continuum of violence against women and girls, and ensuring that any policy or response to this is in recognition of this fact. We have seen some sort of indications that it is sometimes addressed or downplayed as being an issue solely affecting children or minors, and in this sense it can sometimes lack the gender perspective. So our understanding is that this must always be integrated. So again, I would like to highlight that we have a very stark lack of data, both EU level and of course further afield also. The best survey data currently existing comes from the FRA 2014 survey, which included questions on cyber harassment and stalking. But as this was the first one of its kind, it's currently not possible to track any sort of evolution of trend over the last period. So IGA conducted some analysis of the metadata gained from this FRA survey, and we found that 70% of women who had experienced cyber stalking and 77% of women who had experienced cyber harassment had also experienced or reported at least one form of either sexual or physical violence by an intimate partner. So just you know, contributes to our understanding in a sense of this being a continuum. So moving on to discuss what are some legislative initiatives being undertaken at EU level. We have seen recently there are laws implemented worldwide in places such as the Philippines, Canada, Australia, the US, South Africa, just to name a few, but also in an EU context, we now have laws all targeting sort of different aspects of cyber violence, and currently there are laws in place in France, in Germany, also now in Italy, their new law on cyberbullismo. We will now see there's upcoming laws pending in Ireland, and also a new initiative being undertaken by the Danish government, which again increases this the sentence for perpetrators of non-consensual pornography, and will also conduct a mapping of legislation and legal practice on cyber violence in Nordic countries. But I suppose the example that I would like to highlight this morning is that of the UK. In so we can consider this as sort of a promising practice, although of course there is still lots of room for improvement. So in 2015 they introduced a criminal offence for the sharing of non-consensual imagery that carries a maximum fine of up to 2 years in prison, and they also introduced the establishment of a helpline to you know, support survivors in having access to justice and information to and where to proceed from this point. And we know that within the first 6 months of its operation, this helpline received over 2,000 calls, 75% of which were from women and girls. So again, we can see that those disproportionately affected by this type of violence are women and girls. Then subsequent to this, there has been the very recent introduction of guidelines for prosecuting cases involving communications on social media, which represent a further step forward. And some of the positive aspects of this include the fact that this applies to the resending of communications. So it's not just holding the primary perpetrators to account, but also secondary perpetrators or retransmitters of violence in these instances. For example, those who like abusive footage or share or download or attempt to repost this footage. So this is a positive step, and it also includes the possibility to adduce evidence for cases such as coercive and controlling behavior by looking at social media activity, which is important when we look at, say, functions such as the Snapchat Snap Map. And so this is a new introduction that allows users to actually track others down to even the exact street address, which we know will have very potentially dangerous consequences for those currently in abusive intimate partner relationships. But we know, however, that where legal or legislative initiatives exist, there is still overall an inadequate response to tackling cyber violence. So, for an example, of the 1,160 cases reported under this new revenge porn law in the UK in its first year, 61% of those resulted in no further action being taken by police. And again, we attribute this to this sort of lack of understanding of the real world implications of this type of violence, and a lack of awareness surrounding it being you know, a valid form of violence that exists on a continuum and is you know, non-distinct from that experienced offline. So what are some of IGA's recommendations for tackling cyber violence at member state and EU level? We would recommend of primary importance is the training, or specialized training of police and judiciary, specifically those who are the first responders to violence, so helpline operators or law enforcement officers, as we know that this can have a large impact upon decisions to further seek access to justice or support services. Secondly, we would recommend, again, as mentioned previously, that any policy initiative recognizes the fact that cyber violence is a broader form of violence against women and girls, and that responses should also include the perspective of survivors. We would also recommend that definitions of cyber violence are incorporated into EU legislation, so that this provides the opportunity for survivors to access specialized support services. Again, as part of our mandate is to provide this gender perspective for EU agencies. We recommend that the Migration and Home Affairs website, which is responsible for tackling cybercrime, would include cyber violence against women and girls in its definition. It currently looks at luring and recruitment, and it also includes incitement to violence as being racialized or xenophobic, and we would recommend that this should also include misogyny, so the potential to incite violence against women by disseminating misogynistic hate speech, etc. Also, again, we know we need more qualitative and quantitative research, looking at system response from the perspective of survivors. And again, we need entrenched commitment from the ICT sector and the development of self-regulatory standards. One positive example is the introduction of Facebook's new photo matching technology, which actually prohibits the resharing or reposting of images that have been previously flagged as non-consensual. So that's a step forward, but we do know we have a ways to go. So I have to wrap up now, but thank you very much to the European Women's Lobby again for inviting us, and I will be participating in the tweet chat. So we look forward to talking more with you there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's very interesting to also hear the good practices. I'd like to just pick up some of among what you said. You gave some data, and it links to what Alexandra just said, this paradox of the big data world we live in, and at the same time the lack of data on the scale of violence against women. So as you said, there are some data at European level, but it's a few only, and it's very paradoxical that there's no data on cyber violence against women and girls, which really show the lack of political interest on that issue. You also highlighted the lack of gender perspective in many of the policy responses to online violence. So you mentioned policies on children. Maybe we can also mention hate speech. Many policies on hate speech are very gender neutral, and they don't address the specificities of attacks on women. And finally, you talked about the inadequate response for the law enforcement and the police, and the lack of follow-up, which is also what happens in real life for women victims of violence. And that really shows the that online violence is really treated like real violence against women as something that is not serious, and where the victim is still to blame. And that gives me the perfect link to introduce Nicole Shepard, who is a researcher. So Nicole, you will let us know about your latest article, where you show how controlling and selling data from and on women is a continuity of male policing women's body and speech. So we want to hear from you about that, and also your opinion on accountability mechanisms for tech companies. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for introducing me. And just maybe before I begin, I won't be summarizing the paper. I can link that later in the tweet chat. I think it's also linked in the bio. I'll give a brief introduction on feminist implications of big data roughly, and then I'll go into a few tensions that I see when we combine feminist thinking with thinking about privacy and thinking about data, and I'll try to relate that as much as possible to online harassment. So I think we've already come quite a long way since the early days of the big data hype, after sort of initial hyperbolic claims that data will just solve all our problems and answer all kinds of questions we never really had. And, you know, that theory would replace, that data would replace theory, would replace the social sciences, and so on. A lot of critical work has, of course, appeared and toned down the narrative by more than a few notches since. A couple of things are quite clear by now. So, for example, we know that even the biggest data set is only ever a sample and never a whole population. And who's included in that sample?
I'm sorry to cut you quick. Can you make sure that you speak closer to your microphone, because we hear you from quite far?
My microphone is right next to my mouth, though.
Yeah, so if you hold it, we hear you very much better.
Okay, I'll try.
So really close to your mouth.
Like this? That's weird.
Yeah, no, it's really better. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Not a problem, thanks. So a couple of things are clear by now due to critical research and critical interventions. Like I said, big data, no matter how big, is always ever a sample, not a population. And importantly, who's included in that sample is actually not only geographically specific, but also gendered and racialized and classed. And that means that data as such is never actually neutral, and objectivity in data as elsewhere is not much more than a very, very persistent myth. Similarly, algorithms don't just emerge from some kind of egalitarian vacuum. They're made by actual people, and we all kind of know who these people usually are. Technology is embedded in the same kinds of unequal power relations as everything else, of course. And almost anyone can become a data point in one way or another, but only very few have the capacity to actually collect data at a large scale, and an even smaller elite can then process and analyze that data due to computing capacity and due to specialized skill. My worry around contemporary data practices is that feminist tools we have at our disposal to think about data, to think about knowledge production more broadly, to think about research methods and so on, are underused. Things I have in mind here are intersectionality or reflexivity, but also concepts like situated knowledges or strong objectivity, epistemic violence, or loads of feminist work around agency and consent. So for my remaining time, I'll turn to a couple of maybe a little bit disjointed tensions around the feminist politics of data and privacy in relation to online harassment. So to begin with privacy, feminism of course has a fairly complicated relationship with privacy. A great deal of exploitation and violence and coercion takes place in the privacy of the home and is often protected by privacy rights in that respect, which has made it difficult to politicize the personal. That history, along with decades worth of feminist debate around the public-private divide, makes many feminists understandably very cautious, if not reluctant, around the protection of privacy online. I think we could productively think of this as some kind of double bind. So privacy on the one hand is a privilege that isn't afforded equally to all. So at varying points in history, including our current times, women or queers or trans people, people of color, disabled people, poor people, recipients of state benefits, refugees, and a wide range of other groups, especially those who kind of inhabit multiple intersections, are groups whose privacy was never quite considered on the same level as that of privileged groups. But we can at the same time also turn that argument on its head. We can also think of giving up privacy, of consenting to transparency as a privilege that isn't distributed equally. We all have something to hide, that much should be clear by now, but who's in the best position to reveal as good as anything? Who's in the best position to say, well, I have nothing to hide? That again is usually the privileged groups who can get away with much more than marginalized groups. So instead of engaging in these kinds of good privacy versus bad privacy, or is privacy good for women, is privacy bad for women types of debates, it might make sense to focus more on highlighting and fighting these inequalities in access to privacy, on making its protection online more widely accessible, because there definitely is a feminist argument to be made for the protection of privacy. Alexandra has mentioned it a few minutes ago. Marginalized groups are exposed to even more harassment and persecution without privacy, and the freedom to experiment with gender identities, with sexuality, and more broadly coming to one's identity, rely on privacy and anonymity. Same goes for feminist activism and research and journalism, where a lack of privacy and or a lack of anonymity can lead to exposure and harassment, not only of themselves, not only of the activists and researchers and journalists, but of course also of the very often marginalized people they work with or they work for. So I move on from privacy to a kind of feminist politics of data for a bit. The politics of data affects a wide range of people, but not all in the same ways. That includes big data and surveillance, that includes questions around privacy and anonymity, that also includes online harassment and other forms of technology-related violence, or whatever we want to call it at this point. So I don't know whether there is actually such a thing as feminist data, but some data practices are definitely more in line with the feminist ethics than others. So that includes, for example, thinking very carefully about agency and consent in relation to data. That includes questioning power relations behind who gets to collect data and who becomes a data point. That also includes questioning and critiquing not only the data practices of governments and large corporations, which we're usually quite quick to do, but that also includes questioning our own research and activism when we handle that data, when we collect data for good, essentially. So it's important to always question what is being left out of the frame, which questions do we ask and don't we ask of our data as of our participants. What silences might missing data reveal, what outliers in the data might say something about discrimination or about exclusions, but also who gets to do the definitional work, who decides what counts as harassment in the data and elsewhere and what doesn't. Is our approach intersectional enough to capture the ways in which harassment affects different people differently? So these and similar questions can refer to the sort of algorithmic and human efforts to stop online harassment by the means of data, but they can also refer to our own understanding of harassment and to our research and our efforts to get bigger and better data about online harassment, which, you know, we do feel we need, as far as I gather. So for example, a fairly recent, so I think it was 2014-ish, large-scale European study interviewed 42,000 women across all EU countries, published a report of almost 200 pages, but didn't make a single mention of race in any of those 200 pages. And that kind of still feels somewhat symptomatic for the European context. And in the small section that dealt specifically with online harassment rather than violence against women more broadly, it was very narrow in what counted as harassment. It was reduced to 2 or 3 very specific items that participants were asked, which meant that it reported much lower numbers of women affected by online harassment than other studies like the Pew Research Report and others that come out at around 40 to 45% of women having experienced online harassment at some point in their life, whereas this study, I think, said 11, 12-ish% or something like that. But operationalization of harassment has been mentioned before and is kind of a different story than pure data, I guess. So it definitely makes sense to talk about the online harassment of women and girls. As we've seen, they are disproportionately targeted by online abuse. That's what various studies agree on. But it's also worth keeping in mind that not all online violence is purely gender-based, and that we can only have a partial understanding of violence against women, online violence against women, if we neglect the intersections between gender and race and religion or sexuality and so on. So producing data, you know, in a quest to get better data, bigger data about online harassment and its effects, of course, producing data that further conflates online harassment with gender and with women or with sexual violence against women online very specifically is too narrow. So feminist politics data has to go further than simply generating more data about women or adding data or adding women to data more extensively. So at a minimum, I think it should be intersectional enough to capture how race and sexuality or religion, amongst other factors, affect online harassment of women. But ideally, I would say it should capture the issue much more broadly and work towards data that actually includes women, men, trans and non-binary people to examine how gendered and sexualized harassment, racist harassment, Islamophobic and anti-Semitic harassment and so on intersect and affect different groups of people very differently.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you so much, Nicole. Are you finished? Sorry.
Yes, I am actually.
Okay. I thought you were because you stopped talking, so I thought you were finished. But thank you so much. I think it's your contribution is very important because it's putting back the whole issue of cyber violence in the broader context of power inequalities that you mentioned. You mentioned how we always need to look at who is defining concepts, who is collecting data, and how. And that was something very interesting for us in our research when we were looking at the abusers. And you might have seen over the last 4 or 6 weeks, we've been posting some visuals about different types of abusers. And we were thinking about how they were named and who was naming them. And we reframed them also to bring back the feminist perspective, which means to bring back the type of abuse and the experience of victims is instead of using this vocabulary which is very techy and which makes invisible the violence. So instead of talking about revenge porn, we can talk about non-consensual image online. We can talk about sexual abuse online instead of talking about grooming. And that's very important to be able to reframe from our feminist perspective. So I think it's very important that you came to us to talk about this power analysis. And in terms of the intersection, we're very happy that later in the conference, we will have one of our members who will be talking about this intersection between race and sex that she experienced herself. And that's a very important topic to bring into light. So thank you for that. And now I turn to Emma Holten, who is a Danish activist and survivor. So Emma, you will let us know about your experience and how you developed resilience strategies and how your experience fueled your activism. So I'm trying to unmute you. Again, it takes a little bit of time, I don't know why. Can you try to do it yourself? Yeah, you are self-muted, so you need to unmute yourself. Yes, it works
like
now.
this. Do you hear me? Everyone else as well? Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Emma Holten, and I am a feminist activist and a non-consensual pornography victim and survivor. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about, first of all, of course, my own experience as a victim and what are the things that I think are often underplayed about victims' experiences. Then also I'll be talking a little bit about my experiences working as an activist and speaking especially to young groups about these issues and what my experience is in talking to them. Because I think there's a lot of misunderstandings around how this type of violence is being perpetrated, how they see victims is also often very simplified. And then lastly, I will be talking about some of the other continuums that we can see revenge porn and non-consensual pornography on, except also, you know, the continuum of violence against women, because it's also related to other types of, especially technology-related types of abuse and violence that are not only gendered, but of course racialized, and all these different types of intersections. So for those who don't know my work, I'm Emma Holten, and in 2011 I was a victim of revenge porn, or more properly non-consensual pornography. I don't know who victimized me. My email was accessed by a stranger, and pictures of me, as well as my private address and my phone number, and Google Street View pictures of my house and the names of my family members and my colleagues and where I worked, and basically all identifying information of me was put in a big folder and uploaded online with the message to ruin this bitch's life. To be honest, that's what it said. This is what is popularly called doxing. So for me, it was not only pictures, but also private information, which I think is very, very important in how I see the type of crime that I have been a victim of. Because I think, first of all, as a victim, you experience an extreme lack of understanding of the severity of the crime that you have been a victim of. A couple of the other speakers mentioned it as well. I basically cannot underscore how greatly the dichotomy between real life and the internet is still very, very strong. Many people consider internet crime to be almost not at all related to your real life and to have basically zero consequence for your real life, which makes it very difficult as a victim to communicate your suffering to other people. It makes it very, very hard for you to make other people understand that being a non-consensual pornography victim is actually something that goes into every consideration of everything you do. To give an example, I could of course never have my address somewhere in public or give it to a private person who I do not know. I could never give out my phone number to a person I do not know. I could never give it out to a journalist, for example. That is simply too dangerous for me. And when I talk to private people who are victims, what they say to me is also what is the big dominant feeling for them is actually not sexual shame, even though sexual shame is what is most commonly associated with this type of crime. The most dominant experience is the experience of unsafety, of not being safe in the street, of not being safe online, of always feeling that you are being observed by strangers, that you are being recognized, that you are being looked at, that your profiles, that everywhere you go is being surveilled by strangers, and that you are always extremely vulnerable. And that feeling is very, very rational, because that is exactly what happens. You become, I think, Nicole called it a data point, and I think that's a very specific way of saying it, is that suddenly people are noticing you, and they're using you and using your identifying information in order to create a narrative for themselves. So you are extremely surveilled, you're extremely looked at all the time, and it is a very big sense of powerlessness to be looked at and not seeing the people looking at you. So the basic sense is a constant sense of being surveilled, and this goes both for physical life and for digital life. The other very dominant sense that victims experience is the sense of having lost the personal narrative. And I think this is very, very important. Alexandra talked about it as well, this idea that when we talk online, we also create new narratives about women, about people of color, whatever. But the thing that happens with a revenge porn victim is that people hijack the narrative about you. They hijack the narrative of who you are, of what your body means, what your name means, what your face means, and they deride it until it means nothing than shame. So it's also a very, very strong experience of having people stealing your life from you. And you feel that your right to define what your identity should be is completely taken away from you. And that sense of losing a narrative is an extremely, extremely strong type of violence. And it far outgrows the sense of, sexual shame. In the long run, this is 7 years ago that this happened to me now. At this point, I don't really care about people seeing me naked. I don't really care. What I do care about is the very, very destructive and negative affects that connect themselves to my body and to my name and to my history. And I have extreme difficulty imagining a way that I could overpower that narrative, because it's so strong and it's being reproduced again and again and again and again. Another important thing to say is, of course, that revenge porn and non-consensual pornography is never linear. It's not 7 years ago that this happened to me. If someone uploads it to a new site, it happened yesterday. To many people, it happened yesterday. So that there is not this maturing of the crime where you grow and you get it at a distance. There is a constant reproduction of time of the crime that completely eliminates linear time, and it completely eliminates your possibility of a healing process, which makes it extremely difficult to relate to this type of crime, because it's completely suspended by the time passing. In a way, I will forever be 17 years old and naked in my boyfriend's bedroom in high school. I will never transgress beyond that age. And that kind of personal splitting of me and of my online identity is an extremely difficult thing to deal with on a personal level, on an existential level. How does a person progress humanly when so many people insist on keeping them in this narrative? Yes. Sorry, I just need to look at my notes, sorry. And I also think that something that we need to think about is the intention of people who commit this crime. There is a huge misunderstanding, and this is also very much for the public. I think many who are participants in this panel will know this, that the intention of the people who participate in this is, of course, not to look at naked women. If you wanted to do that, there are many places you could do that. It is very clear to me that revenge porn pictures and pictures gained and videos gained without consent are circulated with the explicit knowledge and intent of sharing material without consent. In that sort of way, it distinguishes itself from pornography. And in the environments that these things are shared, there is a very high standard on things being shared without consent, to the point where people get very angry if it turns out that things are shared with consent. So people who participate in this, and now I'm talking especially about older people who do not know the victim, the people who run the sites where this goes, the concept of this is very explicitly to hijack the identity of the victim. That is what it is supposed to do, and that is exactly what it does. And it wants to put the victim in a sense of constant unease, and that is also what it does. Another aspect of being a victim that I think it's important to recognize also for the victim's healing process, which is very big for me, but also for the many victims that I speak to every day, is that of keeping the victimization a secret. Basically, most of what you do as a victim is attempting to keep this a secret. That's what you're thinking about all the time. Who knows this? Who has already victimized me? Who is a part of this? When you enter a room, the first thing that goes through your head is, who in this room have already been a part of harassing me? Have these people seen me naked already? You navigate extremely difficult waters all the time, because you're in a position to be outed. Usually, you know, LGBTQ people talk about coming out of the closet again and again and again during your life, and that's what happens with the revenge porn victim as well. Constantly we talk about, do they know? Should I tell them? How will they react? Will they continue to be friends with me? Will they want to hire me? So there is this in and out of the closet movement going on for revenge porn victims all the time, which is very similar to that of LGBTQ people, and that of not always being able to take respect from strangers for granted. You're always in a negotiation with, will this person be able to manage my humanity and see me as human, or will they not? And oftentimes they will not. This is of course exacerbated in countries that have more orthodox or conservative views of sexuality, but in a country like Denmark, which is heralded for its very liberated sexuality, I have been fired from jobs, I've lost friends, you know. So you're constantly in a negotiation with the people around you about whether you are a human or not. And that issue of keeping it a secret is actually what takes up most space for many victims, in my experience, is that everyday negotiation of keeping a secret. So every type of social situation is a total minefield. You have no idea how every social situation will end up. Last but not least, I want to talk to you about, you were talking about the continuum, and I want to talk about the continuum of what I see this type of crime being a part of. And I think what's very important for me to say is that when I talk to especially young people who are not violators but who are participants or second sharers, they see it as entertainment. And I have to say we also have to look at this in the continuum of online humiliation come entertainment. Because that's how they see it. When they treat it much more than a violation, they treat it as a reality show. They treat it as lifting themselves up by seeing other people being humiliated, and amusing themselves by seeing other people being humiliated. And by constantly violating and degrading a person, you of course have to dehumanize that person. That is the basic tenet of this type of humiliation. But they see it as a joke. So when they do meet me and talk to me about the violation, they have only seen it as their personal stake in it. I laughed. She didn't know I laughed. It doesn't matter. They don't see it as a continuous part of my life that everyone is laughing at me. So they're not able to see themselves as part of a structural oppression of a person and a constant oppression of a person. However, even if the intention is not necessarily sexist abuse of a person, of course the consequence becomes heavily gendered, seeing as the victims are constantly women and almost always women. And the consequence always, of course, becomes women's lesser wish to speak publicly, women's lesser wish to trust men, is the main consequence that we're seeing. And also, every time you ridicule a revenge porn victim who's a woman, there are 100,000 women who see it and internalize that violence. And we're seeing, unfortunately, this in on a very big scale with young people in Denmark and also in other places that I'm traveling to. So, lastly, I think that we have to, sorry, I'm going a bit over time. I think we have to look at this and understand and discern intention and consequence, because I constantly see those two things being mixed around. And people say, I don't have this intention, and are not able to, in that intention, not include, they can include the consequence of what they're doing in that intention not being related. And I think that's very important. So, yes, sorry.
Thank you so much, Emma. It was really important to have your feedback on this, because it really highlights a lot of the reality of online violence. I took from what you said the whole issue of reality versus virtual, and how the virtual world is also trying to make people believe that it has no impact on women. And you really, from your experience, said this is part of the continuum of my life and of my personality and my narrative, and the scary situation that young people believe it's entertainment, and it's like as if nobody is being hurt or harmed. And I think that's very important. It also links to the issue of consent on the internet. And if I consent to put my photo on my Facebook, does it mean that I consent those photos to be used by others somewhere else? And how it will impact on me, and people having no either having no clue of the impact or having bad intentions, as you mentioned. And secondly, you talked about the impact on women. So we have a psychologist who couldn't join us, but she sent us a video message, which is on our website, and she talks about the impact on women. But you mentioned the unsafety, which is not only on the virtual space, but also every day. The isolation that women face, the difficulty to engage with other people. And that links to the next speaker, because we also know that it's difficult to have women engaging in the ICT sector, in the digital sector. So if women are victims of violence and are afraid of engaging with the virtual world and the digital sphere, of course that doesn't help the whole issue of having more women into the ICT sector. Thank you so much for that. Now I turn to Lee Junius. She's the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Google Belgium. And thank you so much first for supporting this project. And we would like to hear from you about Google's initiatives to promote actions to end online violence against women and girls. Thank you. You can talk now.
Thank you, Pierrette. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Yes.
It works. You should be closer to your microphone.
Okay. The talking after Emma makes me realize even more how important it is to have many of these debates and see how together with the different stakeholders on this issue, how we can work together. So thank you, Emma, for sharing this. So we're very grateful to be part of this initiative, because we want to play a part as an ICT company in making sure that the internet is not just safer for women, but as Pierrette says, it also empowers them. So you have to find, you know, those two dimensions back, because we understand very much how destructive the long-term effects, as Emma just explained, the long-term effects of abuse and harassment can be, and we find it unacceptable that women are singled out. So while we believe deeply in the ability of technology to unlock creativity, education and engagement, we also understand that it's our duty as an ICT platform to make sure that platforms are used in a responsible way. And our goal is very much to empower the users with very specific tools, with very specific knowledge that they need to have in order to make smart and responsible choices online, and in order also to give them the possibility to flag and report abuse when it happens. So today I'm very much going to go into the nitty-gritty of the tools that are available, because that's basically what we're trying to do, to make sure to empower people to explain what is out there that you can use. Basically, our work is happening in 3 areas. So the first one is we have very specific community guidelines, which explicitly prohibits threats, abuse, and hateful content. So that's, I will go back later on into those guidelines. Secondly, we have specialized product developments, like the flagging tool that I mentioned earlier on YouTube. But also we have products, specific products like YouTube for kids, for younger users, or safe search for families looking for a restricted search experience. And then the third area of activity is more around educational programs and partnerships with very important third parties like NGOs and charities and educators. It's a bit a broader exercise in capturing quite a lot of different elements, but in the end, it's about making informed and responsible digital citizens. And this also includes very important work, I think, about a cultural shift, a shift in norms and attitudes towards women, for instance, attitudes towards women in the media, for instance, on YouTube, and also attitudes towards women in the gaming industry. So let me first go into talking a bit more about the community guidelines that we have on YouTube. Basically, those guidelines explain clearly what is allowed and what is not allowed. Online harassment, bullying are specifically against these community guidelines. And among other things, those guidelines guard against violent or graphic content, hateful content, and harmful or dangerous content and threats. So what are the tools out there that you can use on a daily basis? So first, there is more generic information that you can find in Google's Safety Center, and explaining what we consider as harassment and bullying and how to handle it. And then you being account holder and posting videos, you can also make sure that you empower yourself with tools to delete comments and block any user causing nuisance, so that they can no longer view videos or leave more comments. There are also moderating tools out there for account holders to define and identify comments that should be set aside and reviewed later. You can also add words and filters using these moderation tools for unwanted comments. And you can also just turn off comments for any video by requiring pre-approval before they get posted. We also want to insist that we penalize YouTube accounts for violating community guidelines, and serious or repeated violences can lead to account termination, and if an account is terminated, that person won't be allowed anymore to create a new account. Let me go now to talk very briefly, but more importantly, about revenge porn. We recognize very much the devastating effects and the humiliation that is caused when ex-partners share these images online. And we take this issue, of course, very seriously. Non-consensual sexual imagery is not allowed on our hosted platform, and we will remove them from search based on a user request. We've engaged on this with various advocates and groups to understand the issue better firsthand, and have a comprehensive approach in order to tackle this in 2 ways. So on our hosted platforms, we have a clear process for users to let us know if they identified the type of content that violates our policies. And on search, we have what we called a sensitive information policy, which includes that nude or sexually explicit images of individuals captured, and we demote websites dedicated to revenge porn. I also want to say a few words on how we work to reduce and remove inappropriate and abusive content, because I think it will be very relevant for the debate you have after the panel. And these practices include a health and safety tool that users can use, and they can contact us about threatening comments. We have a staff of specialist monitoring reports from the tool 24/7, and they're taking action to remove, when appropriate, report on threatening comments. And we have a very important program, which I mentioned earlier, which is called our Trusted Flagger program. And the trusted flaggers are encouraged to use the flags when they see that there is abusive content or inappropriate or illegal content online. And these trusted flaggers are a small set of users who flag content very regularly, and they're part of they're a member of a group that we give them access to more advanced flagging tools, as well as periodic feedback, making flagging much more effective and efficient. Anyone who wants to express interest in the Trusted Flagger program can apply to the website. So like I said, maybe this is something to consider in your debate afterwards. And through this program, more than 200,000 YouTube videos are flagged every single day. So that's an enormous amount. And millions are removed for violating our community guidelines. Just allow me also to talk very briefly about account hacking, because we also know that this creates a terrifying dimension to the domestic abuse situations. So there are, again, a few simple tools to use, but I want to say them again. So we always notify you when you're logged into your account from a device that is, not the usual one, and we give you the option to disable this login if it's not you. There is a two-factor authentication password on your phone. There are also on Android a lot of ways to lock your screen with a fingerprint if your device is supporting it, so that only you can access it. If someone tries to install malware on your phone, there is an app verification option that can warn you about potential harm. So I think it's also a very important tool. You can also hide sensitive content from your lock screen, so a partner wouldn't be able to see your messages on your locked phone. And you can block individuals from sending emails to your Gmail account. So lastly, let me finalize by saying that in our there was a third dimension of activities where we engage with NGOs and organizations to raise awareness on how to stay safe. We focus on young people with school programs to encourage a positive culture online, but also we support much broader campaigns to challenge abuse online, like the Reclaim on Internet campaign. And as we said earlier, we also support programs that tackle wider cultural issues like women depicted in gaming and industries. I could talk for this forever, but unfortunately I saw the 1 minute sign, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Lee. It's very interesting also to hear that private tech companies are aware and are taking measures, and you are so reflecting on finding solutions, developing tools for women using the internet. It will be interesting in the tweet chat, which will follow, if you can also send us some links through the Twitter account, so that we can share those links. But it's clear that for us, the role of private companies is important in that in this work, so that we can all together put an end to online violence against women and girls. So now we come to the end of our first panel. So I want to thank again everyone who was with us, Alexandra, Nicole, Elizabeth, Lee, and Emma. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Of course, you stay with us. It's just that we won't see you physically on the screen, but you are still with us. So now we'll shut down your screens, and we will welcome 5 other speakers who are members and and partners of the European Women's Lobby. All of you, Essa, Salome, Sotfa, Negin, and Celine, you should accept to put your screen on the screen. So we almost have everyone. And by the time everyone joins in, I'm going to introduce Essa. Essa is our Dutch expert to the European Women's Lobby Observatory on Violence Against Women. She will talk to us about a very interesting project, SafetyNet, which is a Dutch platform launched by a coalition of 4 women shelters on the model of the American SafetyNet. And the idea is to equip women victims and people caring for them with tools on digital platforms. So Essa, please let us know more about this project. And all of you will have 5 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me, all of you? Okay, thank you, Pierrette, for the privilege to share our experience in the Netherlands. SafetyNet stands for the fundamental right of every woman to be safe online in all circumstances, whether she is in a women's shelter, at home, at work, or elsewhere. And as you mentioned, SafetyNet is an initiative of 4 women's shelter organizations in the Netherlands. We joined forces as we increasingly experienced how abuse of technologies and different forms of online violence that have already been identified impact the lives of survivors of domestic violence. We saw the urgency as women arrived in our shelters and were found through, for example, Find My iPhone within the hour upon arrival. We saw fake accounts, we saw cases of spyware and all of the things that have been mentioned by other speakers. We also acknowledged that as frontline organizations, we lacked the proper awareness, tools, and knowledge on technology, on online media to protect our clients and to help them protect themselves. And as we did not feel tech savvy enough, there was a tendency amongst our practitioners to shy away from technologies, to shy away from online media. And at the same time, we are convinced that it is absolutely inadmissible to tell women to simply get offline because we are not knowledgeable enough. We just had to turn things around, let the technology work for us, not against us, and reclaim the right for every woman to be safe online. So we started SafetyNet that is based on the vast experience of our American colleagues of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, who started SafetyNet in 2000. SafetyNet, as we have developed it over the last year in the Netherlands, is a platform organization and a network organization that integrates, builds, and shares knowledge on abuse of digital technologies, online violence, and also on the safe use of these same technologies. As you said, we partnered with the experts of the American SafetyNet from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. They have a tremendous experience in this area, and we are very happy to be working closely with them and adapting their tools for our specific Dutch context. And we benefit greatly not only from their knowledge, their support, but also from their long-standing contacts with technology companies. And they are really helping us in this area to get the same access to these companies because they are key also to the work that we are doing. What we have accomplished so far is that we have created the SafetyNet website, which includes tools, stories of survivors, and lots of information for everyone to read and to use. We have formed and trained a specialist tag team that consists of 8 advocates. All of them are practitioners from our 4 shelter organizations. And the tech team are, so to speak, our geeks, our specialists that will assist and are assisting our frontline workers in our shelters. The tech team has started to instruct their co-workers, are organizing training sessions, and they offer daily support on difficult and complicated cases of involving technology and online abuse. The tech team also continues to document stories of survivors and their advocates on what are the most effective strategies that we have been using so far to deal with abuse of technology. We have also integrated specialized risk assessment screening on online violence in the risk assessment tools that we already have in place. Let me finish by a lot of focus has been on raising awareness, and we will continue to do so. We have also started lobbying, and I would finish by highlighting two of the main challenges that we have been facing so far. It has firstly not been easy to raise funds for this important work, and we have chosen to invest heavily ourselves as organizations in this project. And we see that now that we have become more visible, that ministries, municipalities are starting to become more aware of what we are doing, and this visibility really helps. Secondly, I would like to say that we see that technologies are developing really, really quickly. So a lot of our practitioners have been and still are afraid that we will not be able to keep up with all these developments. But we said, let's just start, because we will not be able to do that on ourselves. We really need partners to build a community of knowledge and to work together towards our goals. And these coalition partners are a very important part of our project. That's in a nutshell what we have been doing over the last year in the Netherlands.
Thank you so much, Esa. It's very impressive. It's really great to hear all the work you've been doing. And I think it's important you mentioned the lack of funding, how it's difficult for women's organizations to be able to have support to do this work. And you also talked about the myth that technology is not for women, and therefore we should not interfere, or we should not even try because technology is developing so quickly. I think it's also a narrative to challenge, and by doing your program you also challenge that and say, okay, it's moving quickly, but we will still do it because we still have to act. So thank you so much for that. I will now give the floor to Salome and Buga, so we will have to not Salome, not yet. So we will move to Sotfa, and we will go back to Salome once we have fixed our technical issue. Sotfa Daji, you are a youth activist in Italy, a member of Africa Youth Movement and of Youth for Abolition. And please let us know, Sotfa, what kind of violence, online violence, that young women face on the internet, and what kind of strategy you develop.
Okay, hello, good morning, and thank you for inviting me. First of all, I would like to say how internet is powerful. Like yesterday, I was seeing a video of a woman raped in Congo as a dominant tool in the civic war. So internet is giving us the opportunity to share together and to learn more how violence is perpetuated around the world on women. But at the same time, internet is a social reflection of how actually the role of women is seen in the society. I would like to bring with me two examples of two young women that died after revenge porn and cyber violence. The first case is the case of Carolina Picchio in 2013. She was just 14 years old when she got suicide after her video of her rape in school was shared on WhatsApp, on Facebook. So the father said to the Italian president, "My daughter was killed from internet," because everyone shared her video, laughed at her, made comments and judgments. So what Emma said is that if for some of people internet is entertainment, porn revenge is entertainment, we forget to think about the offline feelings and implications, especially of the victim. After this episode, in Italy entered a law about cyber violence, which is not an effective law since the victims should be just minors. So if the victim of cyber violence is minor, we can see the intervention of institutions. And that's why in 2016, we have the case of the 29-year-old Tiziana Cantone, who died after her video was shared on WhatsApp. So her privacy with her boyfriend was shared on WhatsApp and as well in porno sites. And her mother as well said that her daughter was killed from web, because both women and men unfortunately made a lot of judgments about her and about her video. And still we have not any condemnation, so any sentence. She died and her mother is still fighting to get recognition and fighting against cyber violence in Italy. Cyber violence in Italy, it occurs often, so it is normal to read comments against women. It is a way to increase the stereotypes about women. So all the fights that feminists are leading against the language, against the body stereotypes, against the stealing of images, in Italy happens often. If you can think that on Facebook there are groups in which men gather together to virtually rape women by sharing pictures, it's outrageous. And the fact that Facebook or Italian institutions can't stop this phenomenon shows that cyber violence is still not recognized as a violence. But cyber violence is violence because it's increasing the way, the sexist way with which men think that can stereotype us, sexualize us. They think that they have the right to share our picture. As Pierrette said, the fact that they share a picture on Facebook doesn't give you the consent to share my picture on rape groups and to virtually rape me. You don't have my consent. As well, you don't have the consent to share the video of the Carolina Picchio, who was raped. Already her case was outrageous, and still people felt the urge to share her rape as a form of entertainment. So cyber violence is just increasing the sexist attitude towards women. They are trying to put us in the corner. But as I said as introduction, internet is amazing because now from all the corners of Europe, we are all gathered together to talk about this. So we can, with internet, do a lot to break down this online violence, to help women around the world, to share their experience. Like, I felt really motivated after hearing the story of Emma, because now I am embracing her cause. And we can do this by using internet. So we can contrast online violence by gathering all together, by being one voice and contrast the phenomenon. So yes, this is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sutfa. It's very important for us to know what's happening in different countries, and the two cases that you share, unfortunately, are very important to be shared so that people really understand the impact of online violence, which leads to the death of some women. You talked about how online violence and the online world increases stereotypes against women. And I want to mention here how it also contributes to discrediting women acting, and especially feminists. It's a very easy way to discredit feminist action, and that's why it's important for us to engage in that space. And you mentioned the lack of action for governments, and I think that's something we need to address. It's part of the real world, and that's why there needs to be action taking place. So I'm going to give the floor now to Céline. Céline Pic from the French organization Oser le Féminisme. Céline is going to share with us the campaign that Oser le Féminisme has been running. Céline, I think you need to, another organizer has muted her, so I cannot unmute you. Or you can try yourself to unmute you, but I can't do it myself.
Okay.
Yes, it works now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Céline.
Thank you to have invited me to this conference online. I'm a spokeswoman of Oser le Féminisme, which is one of the most important association in France. And my intervention will deal with the campaign we launched last year in 2016 about cyber violence. First of all, I would like to give some relevant facts about cyber violence in France, just as to bear in mind what's matter. In France, 7% of women declared that they have been victims of sexual harassment during their life, but there is more than that. In fact, 1 girl in 5 between 12 and 15 years old have been insulted on the internet because of their physical appearance or harassed on internet. So it has been said by other participants that cyber violence is very focused on very young girls, and moreover, 1 girl in 6 have suffered from sexual cyber violence. Of course, these assaults aim girls by reducing them to their physical appearance, while boys' virility and sexuality are highlighted. Secondly, what does the French law say about cyber violence? Despite what we can think, there are many laws to prevent sexual harassment. The problem is the effectiveness of these laws. It sets up a penalty of 2 or 3 years in prison and a fine between for an aggressor, and moreover, in 2016, this legal arsenal was completed with a law against cyber harassment, which is also punished with 2 years of prison. It defined cyber harassment, I quote, the fact to harass a person with regular words of behavior which are aimed to cause or lead to degradation of her living condition, proved by an alteration of the physical or the mental health, in the case of a use of a public web service. The law exists. The difficulty is how it is applied, very badly, in fact, because since then, the law has barely never been used, and there is no sign of any condemnation about cyber violence since the creation of the law. So what can we do about that? What did our association is to propose to fight against cyber violence, first by doing some campaign on communication for the victims to let them know what their rights are. We created a website. Its name is Stop Aggressor Online, which claimed for an effectiveness of the law, and the campaign was still based on 3 main topics. First is education, condemnation, and communication. We noticed that women, and particularly young women, are not even not enough or even not informed at all about cyber violence and their rights. So that's why during we campaign we ask for, and this is an important point to focus that there is a direct link between online violence and violence in real life. There is not a virtual world which do not affect the reality of the victims. And cyber violence is clearly a part of the continuum of violence. So that's why during the campaign Stop Aggressor Online, we ask for awareness campaign in schools and especially in high school, so as to explain to children what an aggressor risks, but also to detect harassment, cyber harassment, and how to behave in those cases. We ask also about courses about sexuality, which could allow children and teenagers to deconstruct sexist stereotypes and fight against every kind of sexual violence. And of course, condemnation. The law exists, but men who are guilty of cyber violence are almost never condemned in reality. And also the distributor of the cyber violence contents must be pursued if they do not agree to the contents. All of you to visit our website. Unfortunately, it's in French, stopagressoronline.olf.site, and you will have all our revendication about the fight on cyber violence in France.
Okay, thank you so much, Céline. It's very interesting to hear that you are taking proactive action, and it's very, again, it's always the role of women's organization. It has always been, and that's why we make the world change. So that's really good. You highlighted again the continuum of violence, and you made the link also with education. And I think it's important to mention both education but also law, and how both have to go together, because they reinforce each other, and they create the roots for a change of mentality. And you highlighted the lack of awareness of women about their rights, and that's a big issue, and that's also what we would like to do with this project, is to inform women and girls about their rights, because it's not because the virtual world is virtual that there's no law applying there. So that's a very important topic for us. I will now give the floor to Salome. Salome is online, but she doesn't have a video, but she's the chair of the European Network of Migrant Women, and she will let us know about her experience having faced online threats, both from the sexist and the racist perspective. So Salome, the floor is yours, and you can unmute yourself directly.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my experience and my work here, which sometimes have turned to be very difficult. I'm actually going to talk mainly more on how, you know, the social media is important, but also it's powerful, and it can be very educative and educational, but it can also be very dangerous, and in particular for women. And for me, talking from a Black woman perspective, I heard actually somebody talking earlier between the whole issue of gender, you know, and issues of racism, you know, within the media itself. But there's also the additional aspect of sexism, you know, in the whole thing. And this is actually very, very evident based on my experience of having been an activist for the last, I think, 20 years. And sometimes actually what would go go through the social media, even what is actually not seen as a big thing sometimes by people. Sometimes it's taken as a joke or something like that. I just actually want to draw to why, I would want to talk about my experience of late. And it's actually as a result of a press conference that I organized within 24 hours here in Ireland. The reason why I had organized this press conference is it was to address issues of racism that were happening in particular to Black people. And that week, actually, a lot of things had been happening here in Ireland. Back in 2011, a taxi driver had been killed in the morning because he had carried somebody, an Irish person, but they didn't feel like they should pay. And they ended up calling him all the, the racist word that you can imagine, and he ended up being stabbed. And even he died from the beatings that he had experienced that morning. And then same the day before, a 16-year-old girl, a Black girl, had been raped, and nobody was actually taking all these issues seriously. But the week before, we have a political representative who had said in the media, verbally in the media, that he would not be representing Black people because they come across as angry and mannerless. So he actually reinforced stereotype that people would have on Black people based on just one experience maybe he had had with a Black person. But actually what happened that day, I called a few people, most of them are men. You can imagine when you're organizing something, majority of the people who are in a leadership position would be men. And I ended up organizing a press conference in 24 hours to ask for Black community to be able to challenge what was happening. And of course, men ended up taking up that press conference that I had organized. It was featured in the media. It was a big thing. We had a lot of media coming. And one of the media that came was the RT, which is actually the major TV in Ireland. What has happened as a result of that? I'm talking about 2011, but and I've had a series of attack and abuse through social media and everything, because every time as when I speak as an activist, I'm always, met by some people who want to challenge what I'm saying, who want to say that I want to change laws in Ireland, I want to make things look, they are very horrible for migrants and in particular Black people in Ireland. And so recently in June, I was actually alerted by one of the group which is working on racism here that I'm on the web. If you Google my name, one of the web that come is actually it's a website that says Salome Advocate for the Genocide of Irish People. And in that, so he used the 2011 interview that I had with the media here in Ireland. The website have used that actually, that documentary, not documentary, but my discussion with a broadcaster within the TV here in Ireland. And every word that I said, he actually used a very, very racist word to be able to interpret what I was trying to say. And even the heading itself, Salome Advocate for the Genocide of the Irish People. I go back to what I told you, when I organized for the press conference, the majority of the people who came and actually who spoke, I was the only woman, I think, who spoke and who was there challenging. And I had actually tried to mobilize a few more other women, but women didn't feel comfortable speaking that morning. So we had men taking the floor and everything. So in that video, if you go, and I have sent it actually to Pirette, she has it. If you go to it, you will see a lot of men speaking and everybody speaking, and me at the very end actually speaking in the media, being in the studio in the media. But I was picked by this website, and what they put, a big Black African mama. So what comes with the attack and abuse online is me, being a Black woman, a mama. You can imagine she's a big mama. And actually it said that I don't look like I'm starving. So it's actually talk about, what the media portrays of African, the continent itself, of people who are poor, who are starving, and who are all that. So it's used, the stereotypes that are there to be able to diminish, in particular, Black people. And for me, it reinforces hate, it reinforces stereotype and racism in particular towards Black people. So it was quite challenging, and it has been very, very difficult for me to actually talk to the police here, for example, to be able to ask them to remove that video, or to be able to find out who is doing this. What I have found is that, first of all, the women need, not only women, but people need protection They need to feel safe and secure, you know, when they speak out or when you challenge any discrimination, or if you challenge any issue that is actually affecting the community or the society, you need to feel secure, you need to feel protected, you need to feel that your life is not on a threat. But since that time, I've felt, you know, like I'm living in a world of fear. Even the staff here, I'm in the office this morning, and the staff here, that because I had to tell the board, I had to tell all the staff that if anybody come here, because you don't know what will happen, come here, you know, and they ask for things, they have to be very careful on how we deal with the people who comes into our door, because they could follow us and anything could happen. So it actually creates a sense of fear. It also creates a sense of intimidation that you don't know, you know, where you'll be in the next minute, you know, whether you'll be identified on the street and be attacked or that kind of thing. Also, I felt that, you know, we don't know who is doing this, you know, the police are still trying to investigate. But then on the other hand, they are very slow. When it was reported by the organization that actually found what was happening, they were very reluctant. And they said that, when I say they, the police, they said that we need more evidence, we need more people. Like, how many more people do you want to be, you know, attacked or abused before you can do something? And even up to now, that website has not been brought down. If you Google it, will still come the same. It's still there. I'm trying to get the police who is dealing with it. I've not been able to access him. The organization that was dealing with it before, they've given up because they don't find them getting anywhere. And I actually find it very difficult because I feel this lack of interest, and also, like, I'm a woman, you know, who don't have much power or much ability to be able to change anything or to do anything, and I'm finding it very difficult. So going back, you know, to the whole area of social media. Yes.
We can't see each other, but can you conclude now? Sorry, we have to move on so that the other speakers can also speak and we can conclude.
Yes, yeah. So what I was just finishing, I want to say is that the whole issue of social media, like I said from the very beginning, it can be very powerful, but also very intimidating. And for me, I found it to be very challenging that there's no interest or political will for the people who should be protecting or supporting victims to do anything. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Salome, for being with us today. I think you highlighted very important issues when it comes to the impact of such threats, specifically in terms of fear, intimidation, but also the portrayal of racist stereotypes that you mentioned. And what I found also very telling is how the police says we need more victims. It's always what we hear when we talk about other forms of violence. It looks like there are never enough victims for police action to take place, and it's interesting that it's the same for cyber violence. Thank you so much. Turn now to Negin Nazem Zoromodi. She's a young activist from Sweden, and she's been working a lot on online violence. So Negin, can you list the different strategies you've identified to resist and share your work with us? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. Wait, I can't hear you.
It's okay, Negin, you can speak. I'm muting myself when you speak.
Okay, now I can hear you. Okay. Great. So, hi, it's really nice to be here. My name is Negin Nazem, and I am an information technology student here in Sweden, and I'm also an activist for girls. I'm a board member at the Stockholm Women Empowering Center in Stockholm, and we work with girls who are from 13 to 20 years old, and they write to us about various things. It could be, many of them have experienced stalking via online, or for example, doxing, or just in real life harassing. And they talk to us, and our job is to listen and to make sure to tell them that it's never their fault, because that can also be a difficult feeling to deal with. And I was also a participant at the Agora, where I talked about protecting yourself online, and also held a workshop about that. And I was inspired by doing that because my computer once it was hacked, and there was an attempt to become hacked from someone in China, and I didn't know what to do. And I actually asked for advice from my mother, who is also involved in IT. And I learned that you have to unplug all your networks in order for the attack not to move forward. And then you also have to shut down your computer. And it is also very important to understand what happens when someone tries to spy on you or something like that. So I held a workshop about that on Agora, and we talked about online violence, and these are different things that can happen. There are keyloggers, there is doxing that we heard earlier, and there's also doxing, and I was very surprised actually, because it's very difficult to know about these things, about the technical things that you can do or protect yourself from, and it's very difficult to know what to do about it, because it's difficult to discover when you're being keylogged or when you're being supervised by a spyware, which is something that is installed into your phone, and somebody can get notifications whenever you send a text to someone or even block someone. There was a woman who we were in contact with, and she had spyware on her phone, and the woman's boyfriend, the new boyfriend, was blocked by her earlier boyfriend, because you could do that via her phone, and she couldn't discover that until he was blocked and he stopped contacting her. And this is something that's quite new, and I've been participating in internet forums where we discuss cybersecurity, and cybersecurity isn't only just about the technical part, it's also about how society views women and how girls are being perpetrated as sexual subjects. And it's something that's in Sweden recently been very widely discussed. And that's what I've been doing. And I've also been at my university's project, which is something that we discussed, online security. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Negin. It's very important also to be aware of the different types of violence that are happening. You mentioned some of them, and I think some concepts might not be obvious for a lot of people, but in the report that we will produce, we will define those. But what is striking is how there's a diversity of tactics used by the abusers, and new tactics again and again, and how it's often among young people, how it's often linked to real life and real life strategies. So thanks a lot for that. I will now pass to our latest speaker, Isabel Ventura. She's the Portuguese expert to the European Women's Lobby Observatory on Violence Against Women. And Isabel has an important role now, because she's going to tell us what the recommendations we have so far from the European Women's Lobby to stop online violence against women and girls. The floor is yours, Isabel.
Right. Can you all hear me? Yes? Okay, good morning all, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to reflect on the very important messages that have been shared this morning. As Pierrette said, my name is Isabel Ventura, and I'm an expert to the European Women's Lobby Observatory on Violence Against Women, representing the Portuguese platform for women's rights. The experts, survivors, and activists present here today have expressed and explained how deeply digitalization impacts on women and girls, and that online threats to women and their rights are serious, pervasive, and deserving of the same attention as other forms of violence. The digital sphere should therefore be a space of equality, justice, respect, rule of law, non-discrimination, freedom of expression, and safety. And with our HerNetHerRights project, we call on the decision makers to take action. The European Union and its institutions and European Union member states should develop policies to end all forms of violence against women, to ensure a gender perspective in the other policy areas dealing with the digital world, and to make private companies accountable and to contribute to ending online violence against women and girls. According to the due diligence principle and the international human rights law, it is a state's obligation to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, online and offline. Such obligation should translate into addressing prevention, protection, prosecution, punishment, provision of redress and reparation. The European Commission has already recognized that online violence against women and girls is a form of violence against women, and this needs to be addressed in European Union policies. This is why we demand that the European Union and its member states should ratify and implement the Istanbul Convention. Also, the European Union institutes should work towards a directive that specifically addresses violence against women and girls, including online violence. The European Union should establish a coordinator to end violence against women and girls within the umbrella of the European Commission's work on equality between women and men. Policy responses should be formulated in recognition of the fact that cyber violence against women and girls is a form of violence against women, and all forms of online violence against women and girls should be criminalized. Also, the European Union member states should put their efforts in designing legal instruments and policy strategies to punish and prevent online violence against women and girls and protect its victims. We believe that a priority should be to improve gender disaggregated data at European Union and national level on the prevalence and arms of cyber violence against women and girls. We demand that specific and trained support lines and services, governmental and led by women's organizations, should be created and funded in a sustainable way in order to support, help, and protect women and girls victims of online violence. The police and justice systems and professionals should be trained to detect, respond, and prosecute such violence. We also believe and demand that the states are responsible for setting up an independent entity that is authorized to hear and decide on cases involving online violence against women and issue effective remedies for the victims and survivors. The states should also set out clearly the expectation that all business enterprises domiciled in their territory or jurisdiction protect, respect, and remedy human rights throughout their operations. Also, both perpetrators and retransmitters should be held responsible for the retransmission and violating materials. We believe that online violence against women and girls should also be addressed in other policies which deal with the digital world. We need to ensure that all policies include a gender perspective, because women's rights must be promoted everywhere in society. Therefore, the European Union should adopt a directive prohibiting sexism and gender inequality in the fields of education and the media, extending the Equal Treatment Directive. The European Union institutes should implement a systematic gender perspective, gender mainstreaming, including gender budgeting, in the following European Union policies and programs: the digital agenda, the digital single market strategy, the Safer Internet program, the European Safer Internet Centers, the cybersecurity strategy, Europol Cybercrime Center, and all policies dealing with trade, competition, ICT, and development. Finally, tech companies and internet providers also have an immense part to play. Every industry involved, including internet intermediaries and platform providers, should respect and protect human rights. Tech companies should recognize online violence against women and better cooperate with existing law enforcement instruments. And they should contribute to producing data on online violence against women and girls and prove due diligence in responding to it. And they should put additional efforts in fully implementing the European Commission Code of Conduct. Also, internet intermediaries should also ensure that their platforms are not misused to perpetrate and perpetuate violence against women, and if they are, take immediate action to redress it. Moderation should have clear guidelines to exclude sexism and racism and ensure respect for women's rights. Thank you. I now give the final word to Pierrette Pape. Thank you very much, Pierrette.
Thanks a lot, Isabelle. Thanks a lot for conveying all those recommendations, and I'm sure we will enrich this list because we want really action to happen and we want change to happen. It's important that the first main recommendation is to understand online violence as a form of violence, and that will be a very strong political fight from us. And to understand that the digital sphere is everywhere today. So everywhere in all policies, we should make sure that measures or actions are not increasing online violence. So we are not reaching the end of our online conference. I want to thank again the panelists of this second panel, Essa, Salome, Negin, Céline, Sotfa, and Isabelle. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your perspective from different parts of Europe. It's also very interesting to hear that across Europe, the phenomenon is here and that we need to have a joint common action. We will now go for our tweet chat online. I just want to say that I think at the maximum of the attendance, we had 60 persons listening to this conference. So thank you to all of you who listened to it. I've seen that you all come from all over Europe and different organizations working on different topics. So it's really interesting to see that the topic is of your interest. We will take all the knowledge from this conference to fill in our report. On the 25th of November, we will launch a big resource pack, which will include all those recommendations, the data, the analysis, also an activist toolkit, some infographics, and a lot of information for activists and decision makers to take on board. And now we are going on Twitter, and during the tweet chat we will address 4 topics: how the tech world is a male-dominated sector. We will also discuss the links between sexist media and online violence. We will learn from initiatives who bring justice and protection to women online. And finally, we will share recommendations. And when I say we, I anticipate that all of you, the speakers, but also all of you listening to the conference now, are going to be on Twitter, and that we can build a community of values and practice by doing this tweet chat. So thanks a lot again to all the speakers, to the amazing EWL team and members who've been making this project reality. And we talk again in a few minutes. We are 15 minutes delay, but that's like in real life. So everything is normal. And please follow the EWL account, which is @European Women, so that we can continue the conversation. Bye-bye, everyone.